Hello, lovelies. Bit of a sad week, really. Michael Gambon having died, an actor with a fantastic voice, who most of you will know as Dumbledore, but he did a lot of other stuff besides, which is well worth your attention. We also, this will only mean anything to British people for the most part, but there is a very famous tree, a sycamore at the Gap. It appeared in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and a few other films as well, and it was cut down by a 16-year-old vandal. You know, this is a century-plus old iconic tree, the gateway to Northumberland, and I don't know, I found that tremendously affecting for some reason. It's a tree, but it's somehow symbolic. That happening the same week that we hear that British wildlife is in precipitous decline when it had been recovering in recent years, something I'd seen locally. I don't know, it just kind of brings everything all together for me in a way that other sad and violent news stories of the week hadn't exactly. I guess growing up in the British countryside, in what is essentially the Shire, spending so much time playing around in the woods and so on, I have a complicated relationship with trees. Random acts of vandalism and so on, I can kind of understand. You know, you're drunk, you're high, you're angry, someone dared you, hold my beer. But this was a big-ass tree, and apparently this teenager, 16, 17 years old, took a chainsaw to it. It's an act of premeditated, pointless destruction, and very, very saddening, but weird to feel that way. I guess it's just it's a symbol, and symbols have greater meaning than the objects themselves to us. Which is a weird aspect of humans, really, isn't it? We're storytelling beings. Anyway, speaking of, let's get into the comments on the videos. So I did a Know Your Role sort of review of the older edition of Everway. I didn't know that there had been a new edition of Everway that had come out. It was kickstarted. Somehow I missed that entirely. I might have picked up the new one, maybe. But it's the first edition that I was more interested in from a kind of historical and archival perspective. And I believe there's a deluxe version of the second edition coming out somewhere. Just goes to show how the landscape has changed and how Kickstarter has created this market for boutique products, I suppose, that weren't successful otherwise commercially. So that's kind of interesting to look at. Anyway, Ajax Plunkett says, side note, question. How do you feel about reviewing an RPG by a creator, individual or company that is known for being jerks, rude, toxic, etc., but wanting to be objective with the review? Gives the example. I purchased the game Zweihander a few years ago and found the art and game mechanics, tone and writing, also book construction and ribbons to be fairly good, and was not bothered by the retroclone nature from Warhammer. And yet so many reviewers dump on the game and only comment on it being a retroclone as a bad thing, and the writer, who is a known ultimate a-hole. I agree with this assessment. D-Fox is a crap bird. Sometimes the game is better than the human. I have certainly reviewed things by people I don't like or who don't like me, and I can largely be above the fray. With Zweihander and Daniel Fox, however, I don't know that I could be, because he is such a dickbag in multiple ways. The way in which he crusades to censor and censure people who are the wrong kind of people, and yet the way in which his self-promotional morality and ethics free approach to everything is what guides him, not any sort of genuine concern for social justice issues or anything else. It's all about wanting a buck, and the way in which he bitches and tears down Warhammer and its world and its content all the time, despite having ripped off the system, that leaves a bad taste. And then, when I was just saying how I kind of regard myself as a bit of an RPG historian and archivist to an extent, and so him causing the Trove to be taken down, I mean, I know as a game designer and publisher I'm not supposed to endorse piracy, but being able to get hold of all those old games for research purposes, for preservation purposes and everything was fantastically valuable and worth a bit of piracy, in my opinion. And him getting that taken down, that's basically a war crime as far as I'm concerned. So with some people I don't think I can rise above, and Fox is one of those people where I don't think I could rise above and review it objectively. Look, just buy Warhammer. The current edition is really good. Liberal Hyena says, I have a copy of this, Everway, though not the expansion, of which I was heretofore unaware. I was unaware there was an expansion. I bought it at the works for $4.99. The remaining copies, most of them, were subsequently reduced to $2.99. Strangely enough, the same thing happened with the hardcover of A Game of Thrones, which, annoyingly, I didn't buy. GRRM subsequently sold first printings of the British edition, which had a small initial print run on his website for $555. I've no idea what Jonathan Tweet did with his unsold copies of Everway. If he'd hung on to them, they can fetch a pretty good price on eBay. I was lucky to get mine as cheap as I could, and only because the box was damaged. So, yeah. It's funny what ends up in the works, isn't it? I suspect that what happened to the older copies of Everway is that they're either rotting away in a landfill somewhere, or they were pulped and recycled, which is a shame, but hey, there you go. Todd Zurcher says, as a solo gamer and tarot fan, I'm very intrigued by this game. As to online play, a lot of VTTs do have custom deck creation / handling. The chore would be scanning all those cards if a digital archive is not available. Yeah, for a lot of things you can just replace the cards by text in a random table, but the interpretations and so on, I think, very much do depend on the artwork of these cards. So you would need to scan it over. People have done several games that attempt to use tarot cards as a determining mechanism. I always wondered why it didn't catch on more than it has, but it hasn't. Yeah, it seems like an obvious thing to do. And the book I wrote for the Red Room, Penny Tower, uses tarot cards for encounters and locations, and that works pretty well for me. And there's so many different tarot decks out there now, and you can get them so cheaply from places like Wish or Temu or whatever. Like, you can get ones to suit just about any game. Cyberpunk, science fiction, fairy tale, noir, whatever you're after, you can find a different tarot deck for it. I think part of what holds people back is that some people take tarot incredibly seriously and wouldn't want to cheapen it by using it to determine game stuff. I always wanted a copy of the Mage tarot deck that White Wolf put out, but couldn't afford it at the time, and now it's like finding, I don't know, unicorn poop. I was going to say hen's teeth, but chicks do have a tooth which they use to get out of their shells, which is then later shed. So hen's teeth aren't actually that rare. So there you go, random knowledge for the day. Bear Naff says, God, I priced an entire wall of Warhammer minis during the yearly inventory at the friendly local gaming store. to get enough store credit to pick up this game, and I don't think I even fully finished reading the book. I'm also a die-hard Cyber Generation fan, another game I loved and never got to play. One day I will get to have a techie retrofit a broken cap laser into a full-powered mini-weapon. That's a plug meant for a bolter barb. Cyber Generation definitely didn't get enough love, though it did get plenty of supplements. It was the Cyberpunk 3rd edition we should have had, and I think it's sad that more Cyber Generation elements didn't wend their way into Cyberpunk Red and even into Cyberpunk 2077, at which point, the kids involved would be, old. It's better than people give it credit for, and if you can find a copy, it's well worth a look. I think you can buy the PDFs on drive-through, so yeah, it's worth a look and worth cannibalizing for your other Cyberpunk games. Ensign Redcoat says, embarrassed to say I've never heard of it, Everway. I do love the cards, probably because I was hugely into Magic the Gathering in the 90s, and they definitely have that feel. Never played a diceless system. I've always been curious as to how they play. You brought up Clive Barker. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on Cult. I find diceless systems interesting, but usually not particularly practicable for playing, because they're either wibbly-wobbly like Everway is, or they're an exercise in resource management, which means there's never any real randomness to what you're doing. So that's kind of a problem, I suppose. I can think of ways around it. I guess it depends what you mean by diceless, because there are randomizers which can play exactly the same role as dice. A card deck, but whatever, with a more straightforward numerical value or something. But I don't know. Clive Barker and Cult. Yeah, Cult. I loaned my Cult books to a pretty girl many years ago and never got them back. My favourite edition is the 3rd edition, which is the English translation. 1st edition, it's the one with the black cover, subtitled Death is Only the Beginning, and I wish I hadn't given it away in essence, because it's massively expensive and hard to find, and I've been naughty and looked for scans. I found a clean scan of the interior and a bad scan of everything. So yeah, I wish I hadn't given it away. But Cult, loved it. We played a brilliant campaign of it, which would probably get me cancelled these days. But it was a lot of fun, from the bartender who didn't know he was dead, to the girl who gave birth to demons, to the incorporation of hot sweet tea as a fix for anything and everything in that game and many other games. I reviewed Forbidden Lands, which I thought I'd already had, but hadn't, as it turned out. That's the Year Zero sort of survival fantasy game. Almanac of Sleep says, what's the point of playing as a goblin or orc if you're not a bloodthirsty monster? That's the entire appeal. And someone took issue with him, and they kind of had a little back and forth. And Almanac's point was, if you want to play a good orc or a good goblin, the fun in doing that is playing against type, and the other person in the argument didn't seem to understand. I think, I don't want to put words in Almanac's mouth at all, but I think what they mean is the role-playing opportunity, the fun of playing a good goblin or a good orc is if no other orc or goblin worth mentioning is good, because you're playing against type, and then you have to encounter the racism and expectations of the other people around you. That's where the fun is in a lot of instances. And I think that's the point. You know, if they're all good or at least morally ambiguous, like everybody else, there's no meat on that bone. Todd says, glad you talked about the dice maths. So many games have skewed results on the long term due to misunderstanding of the numbers. The thing is that they even present the numbers in the book so that you know your odds. And they use the right percentages, not the ones that people intuit incorrectly. So it just seems to be something inherent to the Zero engine. And it makes more sense in these kind of survival type scenarios that are meant to be hard scrabble and about difficult decisions like, do I risk exhaustion by pushing myself and so on. But they're just terrible at modeling heroics, and also they're not particularly simulationists, which is something you tend to want more with survival type games. I think the odds would basically be fixed if it was D4s instead of D6s, and a 4 was a success, and a 1 was an abject failure if you pushed it. So that would change the base chance to 1 in 4, roughly, which you could then modify in various ways to represent the higher difficulties. But D4s are really unsatisfying to roll and dangerous to people's feet, so maybe use D12s and make a 10, 11, 12 a success and a 1 a failure. That would work. D12s are about to get more popular. About time too. I think the only game I know that's really used them a lot was Advanced Hero Quest back in the day. But I've built a bit of a soft spot for D12s. I might use them for something in the future. Right. Todd also said, I like the solo potential and agree that stickers on a map is horrifying. But you can also get poster mounting kits that have a thin sheet of plastic. That might be a suitable compromise. Yeah, something like a plastic sheet or a transparent dry erase surface that you could lay over the map. That would work pretty well. There's got to be a better way of doing this for these legacy games that doesn't require you to keep rebuying components. Perhaps something like a Lego board that you could click things into. Some other way of keeping track. I don't know. Remember those when you were a kid, you used to get these books with like reusable stickers that weren't really stickers. They would have plasticated pages, and then you'd have these plastic quote unquote stickers that you could then stick into the book, but you could peel them off and put them in again, and peel them off and put them in again. I don't know whether it was static cling or what that made them work, but apart from the horrendous use of plastics, that might be a way to do it. I don't know why anyone hasn't done that. Yeah, there's an idea. Pay me 0.1% of the proceeds and run with it. Will in New Haven says about the playing older characters in Forbidden Lands, and he says that's a cool idea for older characters. At 78, I will try to remember my skills and feats. Humour aside, it's an interesting idea. I felt that it was as well. The option to start as an older character is present in some games, but it doesn't tend to be reflected well in the system. Like, if you're using a class/level system, then reflecting experience would make older characters overly powerful, so that's something to be avoided. But in other games, you can do things like represent cognitive decline, physical decline, but give boosts to skills or other capabilities, and it works in that sense. So Forbidden Lands seems to go about it in an interesting way, and it seems to work. Moving on to my review of the Transformers RPG. Ironcaster says, the inclusion of a boat as a vehicle mode is funny to me. Imagine building up a speed demon on the water, only to be informed that you have to go to the Mojave Desert.
Oh no, they're headed for land.
We'll never catch them now.
Incorrect. Look, a canal.
Oh, night boat, go!
Oh, every week there's a canal. Or an inlet. Or a fjord.
Quiet! I will not hear another word against the boat.
Ironcaster goes on to say, the Transformers RPG is geared towards the legacy of the franchise. It wants to play in that sort of G1 era while dipping into the multiple continuities for small things. In short, it's for the diehards who've been wanting to play as Transformers. Which is fair enough. I just wonder how big and aware that audience is. I guess there's a lot of crossover of nerds and so on. I don't know. I guess we'll see by how much support and so on it gets and whether the parent company does well or not. Liberal Hyena commented, would it be hopelessly optimistic to look forward to your review of the just launched and widely advertised Dungeons & Dragons part work? So Hatchet are putting out one of those magazines that come with gubbins. You know how you get this, build your pirate galleon in 37 easy issues or whatever, and the first couple are cheap and then they get you. I will not be buying that, even though it is kind of interesting as an example of commercialization of Dungeons and Dragons, and even though it comes with a few, you know, nice standee miniatures and dice and so on, because it's for beginners and I've got no real use for that, and I think those magazines are a bit of a rip-off. So there you go. On my older review of Wanderhome, Cat King said, 8 minutes and 9 seconds. Instantly no longer care about this review. A grown man getting upset about pronouns. Have a lovely day. It's because Wanderhome is kind of exactly what you would expect if Tumblr wrote an RPG. It's not pronouns so much that bother me as neo-pronouns, the made-up ones, the they-self and so on, the z's and the zers. If you'd listened after 8 minutes and 9 seconds, I go on to add some context and so on about how I feel bad for that being annoying, how I have trans and NB friends. I know that never seems to mean anything for some reason. And how the problem is that activists are terrible, awful people, and who create that sense of being triggered. Also, there are plenty of people out there who do care about this sort of thing, and it would be remiss of me not to mention it in a review, since it can be a do or die, a step too far for a lot of people. They don't want to support that sort of thing for whatever reason, and it's not always bigots. So, it would be remiss of me not to mention it. Also, I tend to find in my personal life that the use of neo-pronouns is a bit of a red flag, that someone is a horrible, intolerant asshole. The cause behind the whole pronoun fuss and the fight for acceptance of trans people and so on, it's a just cause. It's just that the activists are terrible, awful people. And you knew it was coming because it's where most of my comments seem to come from. It's the Kalergi plan. So Cryptic is a rare message that actually agreed with me. Says, the only reason immigrants are brought in is for cheap labour and to compensate for the declining birth rates. I doubt that it's the Jewish anti-white cabal or some nonsense. Immigration has a practical purpose. The idea migration is being used to replace whites is just ideological and not practical. Especially when you consider how much immigration comes from, or used to come from, other places in Europe and the former Eastern Europe bloc. Romanians, Poles, and all of that. It's a lot of Slavic immigration, and Ukraine, obviously, of course, these days. Yeah, I mean, this is just Occam's razor. What is more likely that geopolitical and economic circumstances drive the majority of migration, or that there is a secret and special plan to something. What makes more sense? Andy Lau, which doesn't sound like a white name, says, wow, check out how many dislikes and disagreements there are of this video, and this guy still exists with so low views. Well, that's a kind of weird existential threat, isn't it? I didn't know my very existence depended on people viewing my YouTube channel. So do people who don't have YouTube channels not exist? Is that how this works? Do you fade away like Marty McFly if they suspend your YouTube channel? What what are you even talking about? And why would you think that a lot of people disliking or disagreeing with something would mean anything? Okay, quick education. There is a logical fallacy called the argumentum ad populum, which is a Ponzi Latin way of saying that just because a lot of people agree or disagree isn't something that determines truth. Unless, of course, people's attitudes is what you're trying to measure. But if everyone in the world insisted that 2 + 2 was 5, they would be wrong. And if only one person said that 2 + 2 was 4 in the world, they would be right. Popularity or unpopularity is not a truth metric. Andy Lau also goes on to say, this channel just telling lies, think everyone dumb, lol. Rabbi like to lie. Serve you right that your subscribers so low because due to your lie, sad beard. I mean, there must be a reason why I think everyone's dumb, Andy. Why not, apply your boundless intellect to deciphering that? Valar Morgulis says, yeah, it's real, buddy, but offers no evidence, no citation, doesn't give me any reference from the book to show me the plan, so I guess not. Bored Mind says, can't believe how naive the creator of this video is. Yes, me, naive. Me, who accepts and understands the world as a nuanced and innately chaotic structure, versus you, who thinks it's a nefarious plan by Jews behind everything. Yeah, I'm the naive one there, buddy. Cliff Bolvin says, it's happening in Canada right now. What is? Show me the plan. Show me the plan in the book, and show me how that plan is being executed in the world, in Canada, right now. Because that which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Shooter McGavin says, you look ridiculous. I don't know if there's a formal logical fallacy for that. I guess it's technically an ad hominem. That means to the person. So when you insult someone as if that's an argument. If I were dressed as a clown and I told you 2 + 2 = 4, I would be right, no matter how ridiculous I looked. And if I wore a suit and tie and had a short back and sides haircut and spoke in a very serious, stentorian sort of tone and told you that 2 + 2 = 5, I would be wrong. Whether I look ridiculous or not is completely irrelevant. Heavy Crown Mind says, Grim Jim, you're an absolute loser and a fool. Just look at yourself in the mirror. Which, again, this has zero bearing on the argument. Yeah. Kay Fleming says, let me sum up the points of this video. There was no plan, but he stated a plan. It just so happens they're fulfilling the plan by mere coincidence. I don't think that's a fair summary of what I said in the videos. There's no plan. He didn't state a plan. He made observations on the world and predicted the way in which the world was likely to go. And since there's no plan, you can't fulfill a plan that doesn't exist. plans aren't retroactive. Like, I can't slip on a banana skin accidentally and then claim that that was the plan all along. Or rather, I can, I suppose, but it's not going to be true. You see? You see the problem. Atheismo, protect me from these fools. Zang.
Satana Station is an addition to Machinations of the Space Princess. It's a whole sleazy space station, full of locations, services, adventures and inspiration for your old school space opera games. Over 100 locations, a bevy of non-player characters, and more plot hooks than you can shake an Arcturan mega stick at. Buy it at post-mort.com, drive-through RPG, and hard copy at lulu.com.